Well, welcome to chapter 3 of the book of Isaiah. This one does continue somewhat forward from the last one as well. So prophecies, not so much latter days type prophecies. These ones gets a little bit more of at the time of Isaiah type ideas. But there's a lot of themes and concepts that will be very applicable to our day and age as well. If you want to see this also, another perspective of this chapter, 2nd Nephi 13 is the one in the Book of Mormon where it's quoted in there as well. So some interesting things we get to see in these comparisons. I'm grateful that we have the Book of Mormon opportunity to read and compare with Isaiah to understand it better. So verse 1, for behold, the Lord of hosts, doth take away from Jerusalem and from Judah the stay and the staff, the whole stay of bread and the whole stay of water, the mighty man and the man of war, the judge and the prophet, the prudent and the ancient, the captain of 50, the honorable man, and the counselor, and the cunning artificer, and the eloquent orator. And I will give children to be their princes and babes to rule over them. So this is a very familiar concept that we've looked at. If I remember right, it was in chapter 2, mentions it. Oh, no, maybe it doesn't mention it in chapter 2, sorry. I was just thinking about something, a concept in chapter 2. But here's the thing is this is so, they're saying, of course, Israel, the nation, has fallen apart. So what God is going to do is he's saying, I'm taking the staff, the stay and the staff, the whole bread, the whole stay of water. So I'm taking their resources from them. They're not, I'm giving them supplies to help to nourish them and to improve their health, and they're rejecting all of it. So I'm going to take it all away. And so he's going to take away the wise men, the skillful people, the technological people, the ones that have the talents to do things. He's going to take them all away, and he's going to give them children to be their princes, and babes shall rule over them. So if you think about it, this is the concept of highly skilled, highly trained people to extremely inexperienced people, basically, is what's going to happen, because that's kind of the way they want to go, basically. Now, verse 5, and the people shall be oppressed, every one by another, every one by his neighbor. The child shall behave himself proudly against the ancient, and the base against the honorable. So the people are going to look out for themselves. So there's an air of selfishness, pridefulness that's going to build into their society. Again, because they don't have good leadership. They don't have someone who's good vision, who can lead them forward and move forward with things. They're on their own. And society's going to break down and have problems, basically, with that. Now, verse 6, when a man shall take hold of his brother of the house of his father, which makes sense, that's the brother of the house of his father, saying, thou hast clothing, be thou our ruler, let this ruin be under thy hand. So this is getting into the concept, again, of society has fallen apart. Their society is going to get so bad that they're going to go, dude, you've got clothes on. You're better than the rest of us. So you get to be our ruler. Really what it comes down to is we want someone else to make the choices and accept responsibility for the crap that's going on, because they don't want to take it individually themselves. And so no one's going to be there. They're like, no, I don't want to take this. You're not blaming this whole mess on me. Our society is terrible. So that's the dilemma that Israel is going to find itself in, Judah and Israel, because the two kingdoms are split. Now, verse 7, in that day shall he swear, saying, I will not be an healer. Or basically, another translation in Hebrew as a binder up. So like binding the wounds, or I can't solve your problems, is basically what the response is to that person who's like, hey, you've got clothing on, you're better than the rest of us, so you be our ruler. And they're like, nope, I can't fix this. I'm not going to fix this. Because he says, for in my house is neither bread nor clothing, make me not a ruler of the people. So he's like, I'm just like you guys. I can't help with this. This has just gone way too bad. Now verse 8, for Jerusalem is ruined, and Judah is fallen. So Jerusalem is the city. It's going to be ruined physically. Judah is the people, and they are going to be a fallen people, or an apostate people. They've fallen away from God. because, and this is why, their tongue and their doings are against the Lord to provoke the eyes of his glory. So they're speaking, they're teaching and talking about things that are not of God. Their doings, their behaviors, their actions are not following. They're not keeping the commandments. They're not doing what God has asked of them to do, basically. And that's the problem that they're going to run into. Now, in the Old Testament student manual, they had this to say about this time period. He says, Isaiah described the eventual fall of Judah and Jerusalem in terms of the noted officials and respected persons of his day. These included government, military, educational, and religious leaders. With the loss of such individuals, the nation would fall under despotic reign at the hands of youthful puppets. Finally, it would rush toward anarchy as the last struggles for power were exercised within the ruling family. The people would be so desperate for leadership that they would select rulers because they were able to dress decently. But even family leaders would refuse to help. The Book of Mormon provides textual clarification for verse 6, showing that the people pleaded that the ruler not let ruin come upon them. So that's one of the changes that we see if you go to 2 Nephi chapter 13, verse 6 over there. It says, the end of that chapter or verse is a little different where it says, don't let ruin come upon us. So fix the problems. And they're like, no, this is too bad. I can't fix these problems. I'm not going to do it. So, and it's all because, again, the people have gone bad. They have left the gospel. They're trying to teach their own wisdom, their own ways of doing things, not following the commandments of God, not doing what God has asked of them, basically. Verse 9, in fact, is going to get us a little more detail on this. So, the show of their countenance doth witness against them, and they declare their sin as Sodom. They hide it not. Now, I like this verse. The show of their countenance doth witness against them. So the countenance is how you say what you say, how you act, how you do things. All of that is more subconscious rather than conscious thinking, and it tends to be more automatic and truthful as well. You can consciously lie to people, but subconsciously there's telltale signs when you do lie. So because your subconscious knows the difference. And so their countenance witness against them. So they want to be, they're acting religious, but they're not truly being religious. They're acting in a way that is not religious. So they go to church, but they don't do church stuff the rest of the week, kind of ideas. And so he says they declare their sin as Sodom. Now, most people are going to look at this and say that is because Sodom had gross sexual wickedness. The whole word sodomize comes from Sodom. There's some common roots there. But here's the thing to understand about Sodom, and we talked quite a bit about this if you go back into the book of Genesis and learn more there as we talk more about Sodom specifically. The problem with Sodom wasn't so much the immorality of the city. That was a big problem they had. The biggest problem with Sodom was they believed they could do what God said, but their way, basically. They were inhospitable. They hated people. They loved stealing from people and gathering their stuff and building up their own little cliques and communities, but they despised people and they didn't care for other people. The Master Mohan principle was rampant in Sodom and Gomorrah. And that's the problem. They acted like they were good, wholesome, wonderful people, but inside they weren't. That was the big problem that they had, basically. So they continue on verse 9, woe unto their soul, for they have rewarded evil unto themselves. So now they're starting to realize we got ourselves to this position. Our best thinking got us this mess, basically. Now, another thing from the Old Testament study manual talks about this more. It says the Book of Mormon clarifies the meaning of this significant verse. So if you go to 2 Nephi 13:9, it'll be in there. It says, individuals radiate the quality of their spirit and attitude. They manifest the real person, good or evil. Isaiah warned that the disobedient cannot hide the effects of their transgressions from others. President David O. McKay provided the following insights into this principle. Every man and every person who lives in this world wields an influence, whether for good or for evil. It is not what he says alone. It is not alone what he does. It is what he is. Every man, every person radiates what he or she really is. It is what we are and what we radiate that affects the people around us. As individuals, we must think nobler thoughts. We must not encourage vile thoughts or low aspirations. We shall radiate them if we do. If we think noble thoughts, if we encourage and cherish noble aspirations, there will be that radiation when we meet people, especially when we associate with them. So we all have this perspective and attitude that we radiate out, like an energy that goes out from us, an intention. And so that's the problem, is you can fake it sort of, but not all the time. That's the challenge that these people are running into as well. Is, again, they couldn't fake it. They couldn't hide it. It was easy to tell what the problem was. Now, verse 10, we're going to jump on here. It says, "Say ye to the righteous that it shall be well with him, for they shall eat the fruit of their doings. Woe unto the wicked, it shall be ill with him, for the reward of his hand shall be given him." So 10 and 11 is more of like the Lord speaking kind of thing, or this is the message for Isaiah to get across to the people. If you are good, you are righteous, then things will go better. If you are wicked, you're going to suffer the consequences, basically. There's always a consequence, sometimes a good consequence, sometimes a bad consequence. It's up to us to use our agency to know which consequence do we want to have. So when you think about a choice, don't just think, what choice am I going to make, but which consequence do I want to have of this choice? It's a good way to think the long-term perspective of a choice. Verse 12, "As for my people, children are their oppressors, and women rule over them." So this is the Lord saying, children are their oppressors. People who don't know better, who don't have that experience, who are immature in what they are doing, are going to be their oppressors, basically. Because Israel's going to be so weak. Now, women will rule over them. Now, this isn't necessarily, so this is actually a bad thing for Israel if women are ruling over them. And one main reason is because men have been asked by God to be the ruler. So if women are ruling over them, then one, they have completely corrupted their religion. And that's a big problem. That's very abject apostasy. Plus, that their governmental systems, their processes are all messed up, basically. Now, that's not saying women can't lead or wouldn't make good leaders or things like that. I want you to be careful not to read too much modern philosophy into this. Okay, he's making the statement here, basically, that the problem is they have corrupted and destroyed the systems that God has put in place, is what it really comes down to. So he continues on in verse 12, "O my people, they which lead thee cause thee to err and destroy the ways of thy paths." So these are the people that are leading them, that are causing them to have problems. So that's one of the challenges they have is, again, your teachers, your religious leaders, your government leaders are leading you astray. They are leading you through falsehoods, not to the truth. And that's, again, what they're trying to convey in verse 12. Now, verse 13, "The Lord standeth up to plead, and standeth to judge the people. The Lord will enter into judgment with the ancients of his people and the princes thereof. For ye have eaten up the vineyard, the spoil of the poor is in your houses." So again, he's talking about the Lord is going to plead for you. He wants you to return to him. He wants you to repent and come back. He wants you to understand you're going the wrong direction. Come back this way. He's going to work with the prophets, the ancients, basically, to realize that. So you've eaten up the vineyard. You've basically consumed the food. You're not producing it, you're consuming it. The spoil of the poor is in your houses. So basically, the laws of the land have basically made it easier for the rich to get richer and the poor to get poorer. That's really what it comes down to in simplified terms. And that's going to be a problem. The Lord does not want that to happen, basically. In fact, verse 15, "What mean ye that ye beat my people to pieces and grind the faces of the poor, saith the Lord God of hosts?" So he's upset, going, look, why are you despising the poor? Why are you making it hard for the poor to have their rights? You want to take their rights away from them. You want to position things so that they can't become successful. So there's oftentimes in society, there's a group of people that become successful, and then they make barriers to keep everybody else out, so they can't lose their success. They can stay wealthy, stay powerful, and not have it threatened, basically. And that's this problem, this inequality that's happening. And it's a very common one. And I want you to be careful, again, thinking modern about this. You can think, how are these principles being used in our day and age as well, which is, I think, a good thing to think about. But we want to be careful judging their society based on our values, all right? So when you think about these things in modern terms, you're going to think, oh, the other political party that I'm not a part of is despotic and evil and bad because of these things. Honestly, both of them are bad. They're both bad, okay? Absolutely bad. They're both doing this just from a different perspective. So the end result is going to be the same no matter which party's in. But realize this isn't about political parties. This is about the commandments of God. So you got to keep a perspective of righteousness. And what is right and wrong in God's terms is not the same as our political structures or worldly terms. So just be careful on your perspective when you're looking through these. Now, verse 16, it says, Moreover, the Lord saith, Because the daughters of Zion are haughty, and walk with stretched forth necks and wanton eyes, walking and mincing as they go, and making a tinkling with their feet. So this is saying that literally the daughters of Zion, so talking about the women in Zion are being prideful. They're getting dressed up in fancy clothing. They're putting on lots of fancy stuff and earrings and jewelry and things, even stuff that makes sounds and noises to tell people they are there. They're very, very prideful. So this literally can mean the women in Zion have a problem with lots of pride and issues. Generally, this can also mean that just the church was full of itself, basically. They were drinking their own Kool-Aid too much. They were too involved in what was popular, the popular culture of the day, not what God wanted, basically. President Joseph Fielding Smith had an interesting comment to say about this. He said, Isaiah, one of the great prophets of early times, saw our day, and he described the conditions that would prevail among the daughters of Zion in these latter days. Now, in this modern day, Isaiah's prophecy has been and is being fulfilled. The standards expressed by the general authorities of the church are that women as well as men should dress modestly. They are taught proper deportment and modesty at all times. It is, in my judgment, a sad reflection on the daughters of Zion when they dress immodestly. Moreover, this remark pertains to the men as well as to the women. The Lord gave commandments to ancient Israel that both men and women should cover their bodies and observe the law of chastity at all times. That was in his book, Answers to Gospel Questions. So, again, figuratively and literally, we can take the understanding of this verse that there are going to be, pride is a big problem. Looking worldly, getting to that point where we are more interested in the outward appearance than our inward soul. It's really funny. In fact, if you ever watch that TV show Alone, this is something that all the contestants have a tendency to wrestle with. The ones that stick around for the long haul, when you get past that 30-day mark, a lot of them realize that the mental game is one of the hardest parts of the survival, because you have to learn to get to know yourself. In modern society, we can be so busy and so distracted that we don't actually get to know ourselves. And so when you get to a position where all you have is you to deal with, all those demons come up. You have to deal with all those things that you've been hiding and burying. And they always talk about how hard that is. But when they come through it, they are way better people because of it. They understand their soul better. So this is looking on that outward appearance too much. The world wants us to be focused on the outward appearance, not the inward development of our spirit. And God says, no, that's the opposite. You need to go inward first and then move outward from there. So it's, the world wants to make you a shell. Look fancy on the outside, hollow on the inside. So that's what they're talking about here. Now, in the Old Testament study manual, they had several really good quotes from Keil and Delitzsch's commentary of the Bible and others. So I want to read these here. says the following explanations may be helpful in understanding the power of Isaiah's condemnation of the women's apostasy. So this is going to talk about some of the concepts in the next several verses. So I'm going to read this, and then we'll go into those verses. Verse 16, stretched forth necks is an idiom describing haughtiness, pride in self, and scorn toward others. So their necks are up. They're not looking, they want to look down on people. They don't want to really look at people and acknowledge them. They want to pretend they're ignoring everybody, but still be able to look down and let people know I'm better than you. Verse 16, also mincing and making a tingling with their feet. The women wore costly ornamental chains connecting rings about the ankles. These were often adorned with bells. In verse 17, they'll talk about discover their secret parts. This is an idiom that means they would be put to shame. Verse 16, calls, round tires like the moon, were ornamental jewelry in the shape of suns and moons according to the fashions of the day. In verses 19 through 23, these terms describe fashions that were popular among the worldly women in Isaiah's day. A muffler was a veil, bonnet a headdress, tablets, perfume boxes, earrings, charms, or amulets, nose jewels or nose rings, changeable suits of apparel are clothing for festivals only, mantle is an overcloak, wimples is a type of shawl or veil worn over the head, crisping pins are erroneously rendered as hair-curling implements. The Hebrew suggests a bag like modern purses or handbags. Glasses, most authorities translate as a metal mirror, although some suggest transparent clothing. Hoods are turbans or head cover wrapped by hand. So those are some of the things we're going to read more about here. So let me jump on to verse 17. Therefore the Lord will smite with a scab the crown of the head of the daughters of Zion, and the Lord will discover their secret parts. So again, it's not saying the Lord's going to make them naked or anything like that, or peep on them. It means putting them to shame. He's going to reveal their secrets, basically. Verse 18, in that day the Lord will take away the bravery of their tinkling ornaments about their feet, and their calls and their round tires like the moon. So these are, again, dealing with using the types of jewelry that a woman would wear back then to talk about how it's not going to be as fancy anymore. So the chains, the bracelets, the mufflers, the bonnets, the ornaments of the legs, the headbands, the tablets, the earrings, rings, and nose jewels, the changeable suits of apparel, and the mantles and the wimples and the crisping pins, the glasses, the fine linen, and the hoods and the veils. So all the fancy stuff that the women can wear, it's not going to be of value. It's not going to be worth putting on, basically. Verse 24, and it shall come to pass that instead of sweet smell there shall be stink. Instead of a girdle, a rent. Instead of a well-set hair, baldness. And instead of a stomacher, a girding of sackcloth, and burning instead of beauty. So this is getting into the idea of thinking about, instead of, again, sweet smell, stink. Instead of a girdle, which is supposed to hold your tummy together and kind of accentuate your features, it'll be a rent, so clothing that has been torn, basically. Instead of well-set hair, baldness. Instead of a stomacher, which is kind of a girdle as well, you're going to get sackcloth. So instead of looking beautiful but being hollow inside, God is going to humble them. So sackcloth, burning instead of beauty, baldness, these are the things that happen when you are trying to be humble. The sackcloth and ashes, you change your clothing for burlap sacks, basically, and you go sit in ashes, you pour ashes over yourself. That is saying, I'm in a state of humility. God is humbling me. So that's what he's talking about, is taking them from this prideful worldly state to a humble state where they'll hopefully listen. Now verse 25, thy men shall fall by the sword, and thy mighty in the war. And her gates shall lament and mourn, and she shall be desolate and sit upon the ground. So this is, again, the humility is the thing that we're looking at here. So the people are going to be humbled. The men are going to fall. They're going to be in battles, lots of battles and wars and conflicts. The men are going to die off. So the women are going to be left. Women and children are going to be predominantly left, basically. Lots of mourning, lots of lamentations, lots of problems. So this is the kind of destruction that is coming, not because God wants this to be here, but this is the result of the wickedness of the people. So God doesn't want to punish people, but there is a law in place to deal with wickedness. And that's what he's talking about here, basically. It's going to be a really bad situation for them. And so this is getting into the idea of not just the Assyrian conquest, but the Babylonian conquest. You could even technically say this could be also talking about the Roman conquest as well and how bad those were. So let's jump over to the next chapter as we continue to move forward.